So Syd Barrett, seer of visions, or merely a psychedelic doodler? Let's discuss, shall we? The poet John Betjeman said childhood is measured out in sights and sounds and smells before the dark hour of reason grows. This is quite pertinent to the Syd story, as there's many that feel that Syd's the affected innocence, the sing-song cadences, songs populated with gnomes and sprites drawn from the paradigms of fairy tale and myth, was all a kind of an escapism from that dark hour of reason, a world where Syd could avoid having to deal with the grief surrounding the death of his father.
Then what exactly is a dream?
Certainly the band's very core identity was formed during the amoeba blobs and onstage dysfunction and that disastrous American tour, of course, before, of course, Syd was abandoned in 1968. Nevertheless, it altered the trajectory of this band, like that dispersed light from that iconic prism sleeve. Nevertheless, Syd's story continued to haunt this band, rattling his chains from the margins like Banquo's ghost, before emerging as that dazzling and brilliant metaphor of the crazy diamond. And how arresting is that four-note guitar arpeggio from Gilmour? A four-note arpeggio that, according to Gilmour, sounded like the lingering ghost of Syd Barrett. History is indeed a slippery topic. According to the playwright Alan Bennett, it's just one fucking thing after another. But it's interesting if we look at the shimmering blobs and bubbles of those early stages. In fact, Robert Chapman, in his excellent book on Syd Barrett and British psychedelia, states that Interstellar Overdrive was a zeitgeist moment in the development of English pop music. It liberated pop from its blues roots. Certainly with a band lost to these sonic abstractions and pulsating slides and the feedback squall of Syd's guitar, and Richard Wright, of course, there's no doubt they were shaping a kind of atonal music that had much more to do with the European avant-garde than it had to do with the two bluesmen from which this band take their name. So it comes back to the original question, is Syd Barrett a kind of man-child genius or just psychedelic doodler? Certainly someone that took Timothy Leary's mantra, that high priest of psychedelia, to extremes. Tune in, turn off and drop out. No shit. Interesting aside, Timothy Leary had some of his ashes launched into space. I mean, how appropriate is that? Of course, Syd was very much a part of the London Free School, where a lot of the key names in the Pink Floyd story would coagulate. But there he became interested in a British band, jazz avant-garde band AMM. What's interesting about this band is the guitarist Keith Rowe's deconstructionist approach to what the guitar could be. Ultimately, their music straddled a fine line between music and just bloody noise. But this questioning of the functionality of what a guitar could be interested Syd, and certainly influenced Syd as well. Richard Thompson, in his autobiography Beeswing, said Syd Barrett wasn't the greatest musician, but he was certainly aware of the possibilities of music. Nevertheless, Syd's writing was drawn from the influences of kind of an English whimsy, and that childhood literature, that milieu in particular. There was something Blakean about Syd's story as Waters frames it. Of course, he's connected with his childhood self, the innocent, truer self, but also that fine line between genius and madness. You reached for the secret too soon, Waters sings at one point, before describing Barrett as a seer of visions. Come on, you painter, you piper, you prisoner. And he would employ certain poetic techniques, assonance, half-rhyme, certain cadences, unusual meter, would all be employed when he wrote songs. I mean, if we take, for example, one of the most famous early Floyd number, Arnold Lane. Interesting the way it uses the ellipsis syntax while maintaining a narrative. Doors bang, chain gang. Assonance, internal rhyme and half rhyme are also employed. Lane, strange, wall, tall, court, sort. And the rhythmic shifts as well, and some are pointed to the elongation of the vowels adds to a disorientating feel to this number, almost like an acid trip itself. Tall mirror, strange hobby. And beneath the narrative of errant panty snatcher is a cautionary tale that one might find in the pages of Hilaire Belloc. For example, we get the admonishing, "Oh, Arnold Lane, it's not the same," and the anguished payoff is, "Why can't you see?" before it just leaves it hanging there. But Arnold Lane wasn't unique. There was a trend at this time to produce a kind of English vignette of a very urban character. The Who's Happy Jack, for example, the Kinks were doing it all the time. And even the Beatles were a huge influence on Syd. With Penny Lane, for example, its piccolo trumpet and its melding of the surreal and commonplace, bankers and fire engines, with that vague swirliness suggested by the nurse who thinks she's in a play and is anyway. And you contrast that with Lennon's offering, Strawberry Fields, with its woozy haziness and lyrics that border inarticulacy. This stream of consciousness drawl, all aided by that ethereal mellotron sound. As Roger Chapman quite rightly points out in his book, within weeks of the release of Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever and Arnold Lane, every former mod on the block seemed to be writing songs about toy shops, teddy bears, toffee apples, magicians, madmen, mythical beasts and penny farthings. Inspired by the Beatles and Syd Barrett, everyone threw off the shackles of R&B and got in touch with their inner infant. Even Steve Winwood, of course, who was very hardcore R&B with the Spencer Davis group, would decamp to the woods with Traffic and start experimenting with LSD and writing songs about Berkshire poppies and paper suns. As I said, Barrett's retreat from that dark hour of reason was a world he felt comfortable in, felt unthreatened by, a world before he had to deal with the grief of losing his father. That's my theory anyway. But, it's a world of Lear's nonsense, Lewis Carroll's Alice Through the Looking Glass, and In the Willows, and of course, as I mentioned, Hilaire Belloc. And those early numbers on Piper embrace an infantile return to a magical world of escapism, a disembodied identity, a dreamlike sense of self, and a retreat into an imaginary world as the past is recounted in a kind of a dreamy reverie. You can see why LSD was so appealing for Syd. It allowed him to live in this world where he was completely unreachable. Bike is another one that's incredibly important, is often referred to as being an interesting example of Syd's writing. It was a song that was probably inspired by A.L. Milne's The Engineer from Now We Are Six, which has a payoff line in that it's a good sort of break, but it hasn't worked yet. This destabilising pattern is constantly sabotaging its own certainties before the song collapses into a kind of unnerving hallucinatory cacophony. So Syd Barrett, acid casualty, psychedelic doodler, or some kind of man-child creative genius, you decide. The case rests, of course. Toad will be admonished and life returns to normal on the riverbank. You've been watching a video of a classic album review. If you've liked it, please click like, subscribe, check that notification bell, share this video. Do all that stuff that helps this channel grow. And I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, as you know, hope you're well, staying safe, and you keep listening.